This video explains about the exchange of gases. We have studied about the inhalation process, that is an exhalation process, that is a mechanical or the mechanism of the respiration. But how is the exchange of gases actually taking place within the alveoli? We all know the alveoli are the sites of the exchange of gases. Now, also, we have to understand that all organisms require a medium for respiration. And for respiration or the gaseous exchange, which has to take place between the external environment and the blood, it happens through the respiratory organs. So the external respiration is merely the exchange of gases between the airspace of the lungs and the blood in the pulmonary capillaries. Also, the alveoli are the main functional sites where this exchange of gases takes place. Now, exchange of gases is taking place first between the alveoli, and secondly, it also takes place between the blood and the tissues. The oxygen and carbon dioxide gases are exchanged by a simple process of diffusion, depending upon the pressure or the concentration gradient. Always the movement in diffusion is from high concentration to low concentration gradient. Now there are various factors which affect the solubility of the gases, that is the thickness of the membrane, the concentration gradient that decides upon the solubility of the gases. Now, the air which we are talking is a mixture of several gases, and we are concerned about the oxygen and the carbon dioxide gases. The pressure which is exerted by a particular gas in a mixture of gases is known as partial pressure. So suppose if in a air which is a mixture of gases, the pressure which will be exerted by oxygen will be known as partial pressure of oxygen. The pressure exerted by carbon dioxide within that same air will be known as partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and it is represented as partial pressure oxygen, partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and it is measured in terms of mm of Hg. So we say that how much pressure or the partial pressure of oxygen is there or how much partial pressure of carbon dioxide is there. It's like the mixture, and in that mixture of air, the pressure which is actually being provided by the oxygen individually and carbon dioxide individually in terms of mm of Hg, and we can call it as partial pressure. So the partial pressure is very important to understand the phenomena of the exchange of gases. Now there is always a concentration gradient, because we all know when the oxygen moves towards the tissues, the oxygen is utilized for various metabolic activities, and therefore the concentration or the partial pressure or the pressure which is exerted by the oxygen will be comparatively low in the tissues, and the concentration, partial pressure concentration gradient of carbon dioxide will be high. So this enables the development of the concentration gradient. Now when we are talking of physical, that means the transportation or the exchange of gases, there are certain membranes through which the gas has to pass, and these are known as diffusion membranes. So when we talk of the exchange of gases, we also have to understand what are the different types of diffusion membranes through which the exchange of gases happens, because it is one of the important factors. Although all the respiratory organs are well designed to allow maximum exchange of gases. So the first is the squamous epithelial lining of the alveolus. Air is entering through over here, that is oxygen we talk of, and when it enters into the alveolar cavity, it is this lining of the alveoli, and this is made up of very thin squamous epithelial cells. So these are the squamous epithelial cells. This is the first layer. Second is the endothelial lining of adjacent capillaries. These are the blood capillaries into which finally the oxygen has to go, which will be carried to different parts. So the blood capillary is the second membrane, and in between these two is the basement membrane. So this basement membrane is fused at one end at the alveolar cavity, and with the other end with the endothelial lining of the blood capillaries. So these three layers, the gas has to pass so as to facilitate the exchange of gases. Now the gaseous exchange across the diffusion membranes. These are the diffusion membranes, and the exchange is quite fast within this, because as you can see over here, the distance is not very much, the distance is very small, and also the oxygen and carbon dioxide are lipid soluble. So these two factors enable the rapid exchange of gases between the diffusion membranes. Now, when we talk of the actual movement or exchange of gases, let us try and understand the internal respiration. This diagram is showing the internal respiration. Now, internal respiration, when we are talking, it is the exchange of gases between blood in the systemic capillaries, that is arteries and veins both, and the cells of the tissues. So when we talk of the movement of the air or the gases through the systemic capillaries and the body tissues, it is known as internal respiration. Whereas the pulmonary respiration involves the movement of the air through the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein. And over here in the pulmonary capillaries, there is gain of oxygen and the loss of carbon dioxide. As you can see, it is loss of carbon dioxide and gain of oxygen in the pulmonary respiration or external respiration. Now let us try and understand over here, how does partial pressure affect. Now as you can see over here, the partial pressure in the alveoli of oxygen is very high, that is 104 mm of Hg, and whereas carbon dioxide is 40 mm of Hg. Now the oxygen is taken in by the pulmonary vein to the heart over here, and through the systemic arteries which carries the oxygen-rich blood, the partial pressure is approximately 95 mm of Hg, whereas the concentration is low of carbon dioxide, 40 mm of Hg only. Now when these systemic arteries reach to the body tissues, you can see over here the partial pressure of oxygen is less, that is around 40 mm of Hg. So the systemic arteries are bringing the blood which is having high partial pressure of oxygen. So as a result, the pressure gradient is created and the oxygen from the systemic arteries move to the body tissues. Also, since body tissues perform metabolic activities, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide will be higher and oxygen will be lower, owing to the fact that oxygen is being used for the process of metabolism. And therefore, if we see over here, the partial pressure of P, that is carbon dioxide, is high, and as a result, it moves through the systemic veins and reaches to the heart, where again the process goes on. So this enables the exchange of gases through the body tissues, the heart and the capillaries. Exchange of gases is very important phenomena, and the development of the partial pressure is responsible, or the difference in concentration gradient is responsible for the exchange of gases. Now, blood is the medium of transport of gases, that is carbon dioxide and oxygen. We all are aware that hemoglobin is the carrier of the oxygen. Now, when we talk of hemoglobin, hemoglobin has 5% heme and 95% globin. Both are proteins, and it contains 5 and 95%. So this is 5% and this is 95%. And heme is the carrier part, that is the respiratory carrier part, and each heme has a central iron atom, that is ferrous. So the heme is having a central atom which is Fe3+, and this iron is actually the carrier of oxygen. Now, also there is an interesting phenomena which is related to hemoglobin. Each hemoglobin molecule, which is referred to as Hb, this one Hb is capable of carrying only 4 oxygen atoms. It is capable of carrying 4 oxygen atoms because it is made up of 4 polypeptides, that is 2 alpha and 2 beta chains. Now, as one of the oxygen molecule attaches, the overall arrangement of the hemoglobin changes, that is the arrangement, structural arrangement, and as a result it facilitates further the attachment of the oxygen molecule. And when hemoglobin combines with oxygen, it is known as oxyhemoglobin, and the formula is this is the formula for oxyhemoglobin. Now, oxygen is transported from the lungs to the tissues, as you can see over there, and they combine with hemoglobin. Oxygen has a more tendency to combine with iron content, that is hemoglobin, rather than the blood plasma. And the oxygen content of blood which is leaving the lung through the pulmonary vein is higher than the blood which is entering the lung. So over here the concentration of carbon dioxide will be more and the oxygen will be less over here. Now, relating to this, we can plot a curve which is known as oxygen dissociation curve. Oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. And this curve is highly useful for us to study the effects of various factors that affect the hemoglobin and oxygen attachment. So let us study oxygen hemoglobin curve. This is an important curve. It is a graph actually that relates to the saturation of hemoglobin to the partial pressure of oxygen. So it actually relates that, and if we study, we find over here, if we draw the graph over here, you can see it very clearly that it takes the sigmoid shape, and this is PO2 over here, partial pressure of oxygen, and the percentage saturation of HB. Percentage saturation of HB over here, and it is a sigmoid curve. It is a sigmoid curve. Now what happens is, when the binding and the dissociation of oxygen to hemoglobin is a reversible process, because the oxygen has to be released from the hemoglobin to the blood tissue. So it's a reversible reaction. Now when the equilibrium stage is there, the oxygen molecules will bind to the heme part of hemoglobin at the same rate, at the rate at which it is being released. So what is happening over there? At that point, initially when the binding, as the concentration of partial pressure of oxygen is increasing, the binding of hemoglobin with oxygen has also increased. But over here you see it's a sigmoid curve, it's a S-shaped curve. At equilibrium, what is happening over there? The oxygen molecule which is binding, the number of the oxygen molecule which is being binded to the hemoglobin will be same to the rate at which it is being released. So if we increase the PO2, that is if we increase the partial pressure of oxygen, the reaction shift towards the right and more hemoglobin binds to the oxygen. If on decreasing, suppose we increase the PO2, so as a result what will happen? The curve shifts right. Greater PO2, it shifts towards right side, because more amount of hemoglobin bind towards the oxygen. But if we lower down the partial pressure, the curve starts shifting towards left. The curve shifts towards the left. So this graph relation, this relationship is the sigmoid curve rather than a straight line, because the shape of the hemoglobin molecule, as I told, it changes after it binds with the oxygen molecule, and this change in shape affects its ability to bind with another oxygen molecule. So what happens is, first oxygen molecule binds with hemoglobin with great difficulty, but there are certain conformational changes that allow the binding of the next oxygen molecule with much ease, and as a result the third one binding is more easier, and the fourth binds very easily to the hemoglobin molecule. Now the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve is plotted in normal blood with a pH of approximately 7.4. So pH has to be 7.4 of the blood. Then this is plot, and the temperature is around 37. That is the normal room temperature we talk of, 37 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, this is plotted. So, and it is a sigmoid curve because of the reason that if we increase the PO2, that is the partial pressure of oxygen, the curve shifts towards the right and shift towards the left when the partial pressure of oxygen is reduced. Now, the body tissues obtain oxygen from hemoglobin because of the dissociation, because of the breaking up of the oxygen and the hemoglobin. And this is due to the fact that the body tissues have low PO2, that is partial pressure of oxygen in body tissues is quite less as compared to that in the blood. So therefore, this breaks up. When the pH drops, the shape of the hemoglobin molecule will change. Okay, and as a result of this change, the hemoglobin molecule release the oxygen very easily. So as a result, the hemoglobin which is now freed is capable of attaching itself to another 4 molecules of oxygen. It's a well planned transport mechanism. This is how the exchange of gases is facilitated.